Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Temple Northup. I'm the director of the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State University. This is the fourth webinar we're putting on in our Disinfecting Disinformation series. And to be honest, this is one of the most important topics we're going to cover. Tonight, we're talking about how social media is used to spread disinformation. But don't worry, we'll also give you some tips on how to combat it. A recent survey found that only 40% of people say that they often go to other websites or media sources to check the validity of information they see online. That's right, less than half of people verify what they are seeing. And if that doesn't put you on guard that you're likely to see disinformation, then just wait for it. On Monday, the New York Times reported that Facebook comments, shares, and likes of news outlets that are known to publish falsehood, it's tripled since the 2016 election. So if we thought things would improve since then, it appears we were wrong. Disinformation is out there and it can feel like the algorithms are working against us. But don't worry, we're here to talk about how to disinfect your social media. Our media school is bringing you this webinar to help increase media literacy. This event is co-hosted by the San Diego Public Library System. Together, we've joined with the San Diego Union Tribune, iNewsSource, and the San Diego chapters for the Association of Black Journalists and Public Relations Society of America to bring you this webinar. We encourage you to share your outtakes from tonight on social media. Please use our hashtag disinfectingdisinfo or tag SD Public Library and at SDSU_JMS to join in the conversation on social media. Our panel will start as a moderated conversation and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So as you have questions, please just go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. In order to cover as many topics as possible, we're not going to spend a lot of time introducing each panelist. Our moderator today is Arturo Garcia from the Museum of Photographic Arts. Arturo will be leading the conversation. He is an alumnus of our media school, so I know he's going to make sure we walk away from tonight with tips for spotting and stopping disinformation. Welcome, Arturo.
Thank you so much, Temple. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you to our panelists and to everyone joining us from home. I did want to just give a brief, some sentences about each of our panelists. So Shaila Nott is the digital content manager at iNewsSource, which is San Diego's source for investigative and data-driven journalism. Aylin Bush is the vice president of strategy at Ignite Visibility, which is an award-winning online marketing agency. And Deborah Bass is an award-winning multimedia journalist and columnist with expertise in internal and external communications. And she's also the senior communications, PR, and social media manager at UC San Diego Extension. So welcome everyone and thank you. I do want to, so the first part of this panel, we're gonna focus on our we're gonna get the take of our experts on social media and digital marketing. And then we'll go into the second part, which is more conspiracy theories on social media and what our watchers can do to disinfect disinformation there. So again, please use the Q&A box throughout the webinar and submit your questions. So let's get started. According to the 2020 Disinformation in Society report by the Institute of Public Relations, 74% of people report seeing news that misrepresents reality at least once a week. To our panelists, what are ways in which content sites add to disinformation online and then also on social media?
Ways in which they add to it?
Add to the problem of disinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this extensively in like a couple of other groups, but yeah, I think they add to it by being too quick on the draw. And I think, like, I say that, like, all of my friends too. I'm constantly like, did you check that? You know, the minute they find out somebody has died or passed away, they're like, oh no, R.I.P. And you're like, Dolly Parton's not dead. Or, you know, so I think being quick on the draw is probably one of the most dastardly things in this kind of arena.
Thank you, Deborah. Did everyone else have something to add to that about how, I don't know, content sites like clickbait can be a problem?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So as the social media producer at iNewsSource, I handle how what we report gets out onto Facebook and Twitter. And so part of my job is making sure that as many of the right people are seeing our content. And so I think sometimes what gets lost maybe for readers is understanding just how that happens on Facebook. And so a lot of what I do is, my role is really trying to make sure that I'm accurate in what I'm providing on our social accounts, for our newsroom, but in a way that I want readers to click and read our investigative journalism. But I know that there are bad actors out there that kind of abuse the use of changing headlines to get more clicks, hence clickbait. And I think that can be really abused in some ways. And so making sure that you are looking at the source, making sure that, especially on social media, that it's a verified account, I think is a really good strategy. But it is simple enough for anyone almost to create their own page and just to start spewing information. So from my end, as the person behind the social media accounts, it's really important for me to make sure that I'm always accurate in what I'm sharing, and being able to provide that for our readers here in San Diego. So, it can be dangerous, I think, when not knowing that. I guess what I'm trying to say is readers should know that there's a person behind a lot of these social media accounts, and I am that person. So
I actually have, Arturo, I have an anecdote. I know we discussed it a bit earlier, but that correlates with what Shiloh was saying, and it correlates also with how much information is out there that's just biased. So I'll read this from. I have an SEO question for you. There's a rumor going around that Google is aligned with the liberal media to make the pandemic seem worse than it is and create fear. They cite that if you Google any 3 digits and words COVID cases, that bunch of new articles come up as proof. So your thoughts. And I actually tested this there, and it does work. When you type in any 3 digits, COVID, then all these different news sites come up. Now, the search engines are generally the epitome of confirmation bias. So essentially, when you're typing anything, you can probably find what you're looking for. But it was amazing how much the first results came up with that. And there's tactics you could use code-wise called dynamic insertion. So essentially, you can just put in a number and rotate that number in and out. It's called content spinning. And articles will do that. And as proof, I actually did some research on one of the sites, and over 50,000 pages related to COVID came up just on one site. So multiply that by 10, you got 500,000 pages that are related to COVID somehow. Then multiply that by 105 million pages. So you'll find what you're looking for if you get this. And these sites are just there to get, as Shiloh said, clickbait. They just want readers. They want people to come in and read a headline and freak out. And then all of a sudden come to their website and check out what the stats are in Michigan or wherever these places are. And please look at the URL. I'm maybe getting to this later, but sometimes they're at 9in10news.com, reviewjournal.com. Sounds reputable, and a lot of them have logos that look kind of like the news stations you're used to. But in reality, they're just content spinning sites, and they want you to come there, get a viewership, and then sell the advertising space. So that's how it's become very problematic, because you can do this robotically with just bots.
So just to clarify, content spinning, there's no human behind. It's just the system.
Yeah, it's run by, and we'll get to that maybe a little bit later, but there may be humans behind it, but they're spinning the content so mildly, it's really insidious, that it's just getting the number and that query that you want. And then the person writes an article that's very similar, and then they just rotate the paragraphs out and then rotate the company or the state or the city. So there's a combination of bots and humans that add to that.
I wanted to go back a little bit to Shyla as a manager of a Facebook account. Can you talk to us about the powerful tools that you have to target an audience and how you can almost ensure that you'll get to the right people, and how those powerful tools can also be used by, people who aren't necessarily doing the good journalism that your organization is doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not sure how many of our listeners, watchers today have seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix, the documentary. I think it's getting pushed out a lot, and I've watched it. And I think it's really quite fascinating, the power and manipulation behind social media to be used for good, and also to be used for not so good. But from where I'm sitting, when I am looking to have a story reach the largest possible audience, a lot of times our goal at iNewsSource really is, we're holding powerful people accountable, but we also want to make sure that the community the right community is reading the story. So from my end, I will sometimes be putting, we will pay to have our posts sent to a certain audience, a certain segment of, let's say, folks in San Diego, or I want to especially target those in maybe the health field in Sacramento, or something like this. So I think it's important for readers to know that those capabilities are absolutely happening, and whether or not they know them. So when you see a Facebook post pop up in your news feed, if $5 has been put behind it, that would be, some form of like an ad, Facebook ad, or not sponsored content, but a Facebook ad from, let's say, a news organization, but obviously not always a newsroom. But I think it's important to know that as a news consumer, that sometimes what you're seeing in your news feed has been sort of paid for it in some way. And I think like having that kind of transparency is really important from, my end as a journalist, but also for our readers.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else want to add about the powerful tools that digital marketers have just to give that transparency?
Yeah, I think to piggyback off what Shyla said, they are really powerful. And, if you are a certain demographic, or if you've expressed a certain interest in something, you're more likely to get content that confirms your worldview, which makes for a happy news feed, but it's also really problematic. If you tend to be in an echo chamber where you're only getting things that confirm, like, we're great, or, my side of the fence is great, then maybe you need to branch out. I know that I talk to my friends, and I know everybody who's probably watching has some level of discomfort with the current political conversations and the fact that they're so contentious. It becomes personal very quickly. So, we want to feel good, and we want to read things that confirm that we're the good guys and they're not the good guys. But I think that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it really makes us resistant to seeing the holes in perhaps our worldview and re-examining those. And that's really prevalent as we get older. People's comfort level changes. Young people have a harder time now distinguishing those differences in quality media and not quality media. I think when I grew up, I had a very strong trust of news. I worked in newspapers for 20 years. So I had a very strong affiliation with the fact that news journalists were working their butts off to produce really strong and truthful content. I mean, I would wake up in a sweat because I thought I'd misspelled somebody's name. And that is by and large true of all mainstream journalists. But there's now these opinion sort of sites and opinion focused things that really muddy the waters.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Deborah, because I grew up in the same type of environment, and now when I look at the news, I'm like just flabbergasted, for lack of a better word, of how much it's just opinions and not really facts and things of that nature, where they just take some fact and just pull a little bit of fact in there and then throw their biases on it. And there are certain publications that lean left or lean right, or really extreme versions of that. And then some that are in the middle of probably where you're going to get most of your kind of baseline information and fact-based things. It's probably up to us to kind of look for those things, whether or not, you know, what you trust versus what the political agendas are. As far as tools, though, I know there's a couple websites that actually help with that, Snopes.com. Some things we actually discussed earlier, and I think Charlotte pointed me to this one, which is Pointer. Kind of ironic that I said Pointed. And then more for seniors, I think that's one of the demographics that gets, you know, taken advantage of a lot. So the AARP actually is a great resource, and they actually have a tool out there that helps seniors guide through the mesh and craziness that's going on online, so that they are educated. And that's really the biggest tool, is just being educated on how to have critical thinking skills. So I think those are probably the main ones I'd actually. Factcheck.org was mentioned also. I think Charlie mentioned that one as well.
That's a really useful one. I had no idea AARP was also providing this type of resource. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I wanted to, we're gonna go, we're gonna talk later about these extreme echo chambers that we're talking about. But I wanted to ask one question that also came from, a question that came from a stat that I got from IRP, that we know that sources people trust mostly include family, local broadcast news, quote, people like me, and federal agency. I wanted to ask you three, how have you all navigated conversations with your loved ones, knowing that they might actually listen to you? If someone, you know, at the dinner table sort of brings up something that's kind of off. And then bonus, have you ever addressed something like this purely in social, or seen it done right, where you see that there's disinformation being shared and someone saying, you know, gently, but it's important to sort of put a stop to it?
I'll start.
I guess I'll go. So I recently, I think it was a few months ago, there was a post that was being shared quite a bit on Facebook. It came across on my own feed about the waters, the canals in Venice were clear, and the wildlife was coming back, and there were dolphins that were swimming in the canals, and the fish were back, and the swans were back, and someone had reshared it, and it was a really, you know, it was this feel-good piece during the dark times, and I remember seeing it and thinking, wow, you know, that's great. You know, we hunker down for 2 weeks and look at all the change that's happening. But it turns out that was false. And I think National Geographic had come out and reported that it was being shared on Twitter. It was shared obviously on my own Facebook page, and it was actually a cross-posting from Twitter, which I think is important to, we can maybe touch on this a little bit later, but to try to avoid following cross-posted posts. So things from Twitter that you see on your Facebook page and vice versa. But I kind of fell into that trap for a second too. And I think it's important to remember that, especially, you know, if it's too good to be true, I think Alan was mentioned this before, take a beat and investigate it yourself. Unfortunately, with that specific example, it had already been shared. I looked it up just before this. It had been liked over 37,000 times and had already been retweeted over 12,000 times. So the damage had kind of already been done, in the sense that even though it was this feel-good piece, it wasn't true. And in fact, ABC News had done reporting on it. They had re-reported it, and it's still up there. I went and looked for it, and the story is still there. And there were a few comments from readers who tried to alert others, saying this is not true information. But even a place like ABC, that story was up there. So I guess when you see it on your friends' pages, even though that you trust your friends, you love your friends and your family, I think it's even more critical to really interrogate that information, interrogate the original source for yourself, even if it's your mom, your grandpa, your sister, maybe even more so.
Deborah, were you going to?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, like the whole point about, engaging with family members when it comes to this kind of misinformation. I mean, it's really tricky because, they're your family, you love them, but, if Aunt Susie is saying something completely off the rails, I'm the person who's like, hold on a minute. And I always like to just ask people, like, I always, it's kind of best not to be confrontational in those moments, and to know when you are approaching a person who is willing to change. Like, they might have like an uncle or a grandpa who is just like angry, and like they think the way they think and they are not going to change. You might want to just like, state your disagreement and then like try and let it lie. But, recently one of my family members was, there's a persistent rumor that COVID was man-made. And that keeps recirculating, even though scientists keep going back to the lab and going, no, and this is why it wouldn't mutate like this, and it wouldn't do this. And, if this was man-made, it would be like far beyond our capabilities at this current time. I mean, you're talking like Star Trek, way into the future type technology. But, my dad has said it. I had an aunt recently who said it, and I said, where'd you read that? Because, I read that too. And I looked it up, and guess what? This site and this site, it's on major science websites, and all major news organizations debunk this. And so I try to point them in the right direction to say, like, where did you find this? Was it just this one place? Because guess what? There's a slew of other information that counters that. And so, gentle is the only way to go with family. And then sometimes you still might not win. You might just have to like leave the room.
I can agree with that. I was a former bartender, and you can't talk politics or religion with drunk people. Right? It's a bad idea. And I usually take that same approach when I'm talking with most of my friends and family, if it goes that way. Now, unfortunately, a lot of things that we're discussing all of a sudden get pulled into that arena, because apparently everything correlates with something political on some level. So you have to tread lightly. And I think that a lot of times, I read in an article recently, was basically, if the article elicits a very strong emotional reaction, or they want money from you somewhere, shape or form, or they want you to join some kind of movement, or it's too good or too bad to be true, then you got to question it. And I basically try to educate people that I'm close to, especially that. It's like, hey, no, okay, yeah, that's great. You may want to just check your sources, make sure you look, like as Deborah said, look at the site that's reputable right now, and whether or not these reputable sites are all agreeing, or is it just this kind of collection of these content farms that are just spinning content, whatever it is. One more thing, I remembered a friend of mine in a cohort, Kevin Fleming, I'll give him a shout out here. showed me a tool called Bot Sentinel, that if you get a social media profile that is a little too right or left wing or whatever, you can check the validity of their social profile, and they'll do a report and say whether or not they're either spam or a user that's really leaning towards a certain direction all the time, because there are people behind these things sometimes, or bots. So it will discern that for you.
Thank you for the tip. I'm gonna give the Q&A box some love in a little bit, but I want to make some space for, what was it, cross-posting? Shyla, is that like a screenshot posted on another platform and then with no context at all?
Right, pretty much. I mean, it's pretty easy to doctor your own tweet, hop into Photoshop and then share the image on Facebook. So that's kind of what I'm thinking when it comes to cross posting. So if you're on your Facebook feed and you see something on Twitter show up, I would immediately question, or, you know, I would want to know where the actual source is before I ever share anything. I mean, that's just kind of my own, a good rule of thumb is to think before you share, think before you link out to something, and especially something like that. If you're on Instagram, the same kind of thing. And another thing, especially with social media, is the use of memes is, you know, ubiquitous. And so I think being especially cautious, resharing memes, they're a great form of entertainment, and a lot of times I see people sharing just wrong information on them. And maybe it's satire, maybe it's not, but they can be tricky too, because they're often not sourced by anyone, and they're shareable. So falling into that, I would, again, be really cautious about it and probably err on the side of not sharing it. So I would, you know, try to avoid resharing memes unless it's, you know, a cat meme or something.
I saw a meme to add a little bit to that, that said, it was a picture of Patrick Stewart, and it said, "Use the force, Harry." And it basically said how to aggravate 4 groups of nerds all at once. So something like that is very much disinformation. It was obviously a joke on that source, but that's something kind of correlated to that.
Okay, so let's check out the Q&A for a little bit. So Toby asked, do you think that this wouldn't happen if we still mainly got our news from newspaper, TV, radio?
It wouldn't happen as quickly, for sure. It's just so instantaneous now that it's irresistible. I loved that, I think LinkedIn and Twitter both instituted, well, not policies, but they now have like stronger suggestions for people when they're posting to say that don't just post it because you like the headline, click the link, read, because we're all news sources now. We're all like, you know, we're all our own publishing firms. So, you know, if you think something is valid enough to repost onto your Facebook page, your Twitter, your Instagram, take the time to click that link. Where does it go? You know, is it a bunch of pop-up ads? You know, like Shyla said, is it clickbait? Is it, you know, is it completely just like you read it and you're like, okay, there's misspellings and there's weirdness, and, you know, you don't want to send your family there. Like, I do the strategy for UC San Diego Extension, and we know for a fact that most people who follow us on social do not click every link and do not follow, you know, read the blog, but there are a subset that will, and we have a responsibility to them. Everybody who's on social media has a responsibility to uplift the conversation and not like degrade. So yeah, I mean, I loved newspapers when they were around. I don't like a lot of paper now just because environment, I don't know. I still like books, but not a lot of paper. So I think it still would happen. It just wouldn't happen as quickly.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'm sorry to jump in here, but have you seen the John Oliver show last week tonight? He did an article, something related to the Sinclair Broadcast Group. And that was actually a collection of news agencies that were owned by the same people. And they were fed the same information. And matter of fact, a lot of what they said was repeated across a lot of local channels. So again, that's where you have to be careful, is when people start eating up and swallowing up these smaller companies and then use that as an outlet for their agenda. It's really hard to discern that. And I think that the publications that have stood true to their foundation of investigative journalism, you really have to actively seek those people. But then as people that are educated and on that, we need to be educating other people that may be using these kind of left, right wing slanted companies and promoting that. So it's almost our job to make sure that we are getting the right news to the right people, even if we're not in the news industry, but as marketers, as professionals, as teachers, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And especially, I do think it is the job of journalists to really educate readers, watchers, listeners, be it TV, radio. I'm in digital news, but really educate them on where, who our reporters are, establish rapport that way. What are our reporters' expertise? How long have they been reporting on this subject? I think is a really, another tool that news consumers can use to discern whether or not this is a reputable news organization. I also really look for citations in articles. Where's the primary source? You said you got data from where? How can I find that myself? I think that's really important. iNewsSource does this as much as we possibly can. And we also have a really rigorous fact-checking process for our organization. And, not all newsrooms have really the time that I guess we are probably lucky in that we do have more time to be able to fact check. But we certainly pride ourselves on that. And something that we've started to do more recently is really identify the type of news that we are publishing. So if it's a news article, whether it's an explainer piece, other news outlets will identify if it's sponsored content. What does that mean? Is this satire? What does that mean? Is this editorial, an op-ed? And what does that mean? And I do think that is on the journalists to educate the readers on what exactly they're looking at, what exactly they're reading and sharing, because it's important to distinguish.
I'll do one more from the Q&A, and everyone at home, please continue to send over your questions. So this one's from John Beal. What is your journalistic perspective or opinion on efforts by social media platforms to combat disinformation and conflicts with the First Amendment free speech?
That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the First Amendment, obviously, opinions, you are entitled to your opinion. When people start lying, and we don't like to say lie in media, we don't like to say lie, but when there are facts, and I feel like that's something that's gotten lost in this new, I don't know what, but there are facts, the sun went up at this time, it rained, it didn't rain, there were this many people, there aren't that many people, stocks rose this much or didn't rise this much. These are not debatable, these are facts. And I think that once you get people who are flagrantly being incendiary, you can't yell fire, and some of these posts and tweets and memes, like Shiloh was saying, are basically yelling fire. They can be really racist, misogynist, xenophobic. Those are not, that's not speech that's protected. That's offensive and it's harmful, and it's not good for our society. And so I think that when people are I can say whatever I want, hold on a minute. So I just think like people have to be really careful about that. And if you have an opinion and your opinion is that, you know, the aliens, you know, landed and that's why we have styrofoam, that's fine. But you say that that's your opinion. You don't say that so-and-so told me, or I got this fact from somewhere. It doesn't mean you can misrepresent, even if you're doing so because you haven't researched what you're sharing. Those kind of things should not be protected.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to, I don't know. I think it's a great question. I guess know what the answer is, whether or not Facebook is accountable, Twitter is supposed to be accountable for what all of their users say and do on their platform. Certainly when they started out, Facebook 15 plus years ago, they weren't thinking that, you know, what we all know now. So, and they're, you know, Zuckerberg is answering that question all the time. So I don't know. I guess I don't feel like I'm in a great position to come out and say one way or the other. If it's on Facebook to limit content, they're doing that now. Twitter more so, Instagram also. I think we've seen it with President Trump, who has tweeted and has been flagged by Twitter. So they're definitely kind of moving in that direction to, you know, towing that line a little bit with First Amendment and what exactly, you know, these user agreements are for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and all the others. So I didn't really answer the question, but it's certainly something that I think about. I don't know. Alan, I don't know if you have thoughts.
No, I do. And it's actually the emergence of both of your thoughts, which you eloquently put. Twitter and Instagram are doing that fact checking. And they basically call BS on the person that's sending the lies. So when things are just unsubstantiated or just flagrant, blatant lies, then the social media platform is like, look, you're yelling fire in a crowded room, as Deborah put. So we can't let you post this. Now, if you said, hey, this is my opinion, and this is, you know, like, or satire, like comedians get away with that all the time. They don't lie. They just make a joke because they're exaggerating a certain truth that's kind of funny. And so you can't just blatantly lie and expect the public to be okay with it. And again, there's a First Amendment. Yeah, you have every right to say it, but we also have a right to pull it because it's not what we want here. If you yell that in a restaurant or you just keep yelling things crazy in a restaurant, I have the right to kick you out. So this is their platform. This is social. This is a thing that they are allowed to do. And again, like, you're not going to get arrested. You know, we're not going to, I hope, but you know, we'll get closer to really terrible society. But for people to do those things, then we have the right to kick you out. You have to remember, these aren't government-run agencies and things that we're relying so heavily on: Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. These aren't, you know, managed by the government. They're managed by private companies. And so if we're going to be walking in their buildings, we have to play by their rules a bit. And I think that they're towing and trying to merge that line. And it's very difficult because you want to be open and to everybody, but then not allow hate and misinformation and just flagrant lying within your forum or your platform. So I think that, you know, First Amendment, yeah, you have every right to say it, but we also have a right to go, no, get out of here.
And you can get arrested if you make an actionable threat against somebody else, you know.
Good point.
So, I mean, those are very clear examples of people really stepping way outside the bounds of social propriety and legality. And it happens all the time. I mean, I think, Shiloh, you probably know more than the rest of us, but, you know, Twitter had to, you know, start influencing influencing the discussion because women were getting a lot more hate and vitriol than anybody else. And it was like disgusting levels of really poor taste commentary. And some of it wasn't actionable to the point of, you know, you will be arrested, but is that something that any reasonable person using this platform should be subjected to? You know, and it's those kind of questions that that are really tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to see if we can move this conversation to something that's, you know, something like Pizzagate, where you have something that's happening on social media, and then it turns into, it moves into the real world with someone carrying a gun into a pizza parlor. How this might be something that we also might not have an answer to, but it's good to have a conversation. How do we avoid these types of scenarios where they escalate to this point?
That, I think, was, I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but I'm like, that I think was on some of the social media platforms. When that, like YouTube catches a lot of flack because, I mean, there's just a crazy volume of content that's uploaded, and then there's child pornography that slips in. There's, you know, really inappropriate for anybody consumption content that gets uploaded. And they get in trouble when that goes, you know, viral or that becomes disseminated. This Pizzagate thing, I think a lot of people thought, oh, people know that it's not real. And it's like, obviously, people did not know that that was not real. I think when those kind of things start trending, these social media platforms are going to have to figure out a way to start putting disclaimers on those things quickly. That one simmered for a little while. So they actually did have the opportunity to catch it. Some things happen so quickly that, you know, there's, I don't know how many tweets a minute, but it's a large number. But those are kind of examples where when those things start churning, those need to be flagged some way, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's dangerous when how quickly information, false information, disinformation can spread on social media without any like stop gaps, nothing to keep it contained. And I think the other point I kind of want to make around this is that I see a little, I don't have the research to back this, but I see that just like planting that seed of doubt in what's happening, I think is causing more people to doubt information and, you know, either conjure up their own conspiracy theories, because how in the world could this be true? Or, you know, why should I trust this, you know, this site, you know, wherever I'm getting my information from. And I think that like that seed of doubt is particularly with Pizzagate is obviously extremely dangerous, because that led to real world danger. Someone showing up at a pizza place with, you know, armed for something that wasn't real. So obviously, you know, that's a huge problem. But I think that when you can't even trust the information, and there's so much doubt there that could lead to something like that, you know, something does need to change around actual media literacy with how people are getting their information, especially on social media, where there really are no kind of controls around it, or ways to quickly decipher whether or not this is true or false, or any of that. And it really falls on the user to have that kind of foresight to know, okay, before I just accept this post as fact, it could be anonymous, it could be from my grandma, or, you know, whatever it is, before I'm sharing it, you really do have to stop and think and do that extra digging yourself that, quite frankly, a lot of people just don't do, because social media is fast and it's social, and you're just sharing and you want to be part of the conversation. And I get it, but I think that's, you know, that also is the problem.
Yeah, media literacy was a great keyword that Shyla just brought up. I think that's the real important part, because some good things come out of spreading wildfire. I mean, there's things that have happened that have actually been beneficial to help a movement happen through social media, through a hashtag, through something that was going on over the last few years. So, but then you get something like the Pizzagate thing, or something that's just blatant, flagrant disrespect and lies, that you really have to be understanding how to educate the people, how to educate how to navigate these waters, because we have technology right now that we haven't had before, right? And I'm sure the same thing happened when the invention of the telephone, or the invention of the newspaper press, or the television. There was worry, and it didn't spread as fast as the internet, but the internet is just exponentially faster. So we have to get the young people, especially, understanding what this all means, and understanding context and critical thinking, as I mentioned earlier, and then also why. Why would someone want to say these things? If you don't challenge that, and if you just take face value, then you're going to have your mind programmed for you, right? So I think that's the idea, is that you have to kind of now train the younger generation and the older generation on how to understand and discern what they're seeing and what they're reading. So I don't have the right answer for this. I'm an educator myself. So I talk like this a lot in my class, because I'll say, yeah, this is what the facts are. But, and then I do that, and and they get that look on my face, like, just, this is what I really believe. And I think that we need a little bit more of that, and not just kind of spreading, these robotic words that we're all told, because, people, Google said so, or so-and-so said so from this whatever source. So I think it's really important that we teach media literacy.
So we got a question from Keith saying, in our current polarized social environment, do you think that creating something like a public service announcement campaign emphasizing personal responsibility for checking the integrity of the information we consume would be a worthwhile effort? I'm thinking we're all agreeing.
Yes. Sorry, I'll chime in first this time, because I literally had this conversation with my friend. Either was yesterday or today. I can't remember, the days are starting to merge. But public service, do you remember? I was remembering Schoolhouse Rock. And just when I was a kid, there was a thing, don't touch power lines, things of that nature. But I really believe that that's necessary now, to have this, like, hey, just maybe some cute animated thing to say, check your sources, don't believe everything you read online, and a PSA is a great way to do that. It makes it fun. Maybe we'll make an album that has the catchy songs like the Schoolhouse Rock was. Conjunction junction, and all, just teaching certain things. So I think that PSAs would be a great way to start and start informing people and making so that those things are mandatory as part of a program. You get all these ads, but maybe a PSA has to be, especially with kids or watching YouTube or certain things on Netflix or whatever, or Hulu. The ads come up, the PSA comes up, and you understand that, and that was part of the regular programming when I was a kid. And I think that actually does help, because those things are so stuck in my brain.
We got another question for Shyla. Is there a way that consumers on social can know when something is boosted, or if there's a paid campaign behind it?
So Facebook did have a way for, like, if you're following any news organization, or I think any business page, and it's been boosted, there is a tab that they mandated where you could see their sponsored ads. And I think it fell under, like the side tab that Facebook has now completely reconfigured their design. So it may be in a slightly different place now, but where you could maybe sign up for the newsletter, learn more about the organization, watch the videos. Like, I think it was that sidebar. There was a bar at one point, and I think maybe in the redesign that they removed it, but that was there, that you could see which ads were, or which posts had been paid for. So double check and see if that's still happening. I think that, so that's one. The other one is, if it is like a clear advertisement that hasn't just been boosted, this would be like a full-on ad that we put out, like, sign up for our newsletter, or something like that. I'm going to have this ad run for the next 3 months or something. You can see that it's sponsored content, and Facebook puts that on the post. So you should be able to see that it is an ad. And also typically, you know, they hang out on the sidebar as well. And I think it's a little bit more noticeable, but those are kind of the two tips, I guess, that I would have for that. And then I think same for Twitter. They also, what do they call it? It's not sponsored content, but Twitter also makes a note that it's like a sponsored post.
Yeah.
Promoted post. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, promoted post. Yeah.
And we got a question from Amy Schmitz-Weiss. How can one debunk deep fakes? As tech becomes more sophisticated, deep fakes are now happening in the forms of audio and video. What can the public do?
That's a tough one.
That's tough. And I think it's also one of those things where if it seems like, as Alan said before, if it seems too good to be true, or if it seems too convincing, or if it seems too salacious, it's always a good thing to go, okay, did this person say this thing? Like even on like I know a lot of people get like all of their information from TikTok, and you know, TikTok can be really dodgy. You can have like very easily manipulated or obviously manipulated video, and people are still trusting that content provider. And it's like, why are you trusting this content provider? And have they always had this kind of content? You know, it's even like these influencers who, you know, they are by law required to, you know, to disclose if they've gotten paid to say a certain thing or promote a certain thing. But, you know, it can be really like, they can slip it in just like very subtly. And so you're not really sure what their affiliation is or where they got this information. People trust these TikTok influencers because they've got great dance moves or they've got funny lip sync things. Can't stand TikTok, but but I do have to monitor it. But and you know, you're like, you still have to check your source.
Yeah, and also definitely interrogate the account. You know, I would look at their user history as well. Again, if they're a verified account, that it doesn't necessarily verify that the information is accurate or true, but it does help to verify by nature of getting verified on a social account that that person or that user is a real person, or they are who they say they are. So there's at least something there. But yeah, deep fakes is really, that is tricky. I think I would go about it by also doing, opening up more tabs, quite frankly, like Googling more to see where other news sources are, if it's popped up elsewhere, or this is really like an isolated event that's only being shared, let's say on TikTok or something. I would not be sharing anything like that. And I'd certainly want to do my own research. I'd want to know where the original source was, who the person is that is maybe being manipulated, or whatever the content is. And just really have a lot more sources to back up that one source that can help me verify and make sure that where I'm getting my other sources is actually credible as well. So.
Yeah, there's a thing called, to piggyback off of that, author bias. Basically, you want to make sure that you research the author, even if the source is reputable. Who's the author? Are they just there to kind of promote this little product, or are they there to kind of cause a stir? So that's where you have to go into that and do a lot of that research. And a lot of times when I hear something outlandish or even see something outlandish, I do exactly what Shyla does. I have a million tabs open, and not just Google. You know, I might Bing something, or DuckDuckGo it, you know, which is a terrible name for a search engine, but just to see if there's different sources that come up. And there's also different forums like Reddit are really, depending on who you talk to, but there's a lot of, the community there is in place to try to get to the truth and the bottom of it. And they're quick to jump off somebody who's really trying to fake the public. depending on who you talk to on Reddit, but that's usually the sentiment that's there. And there's a variety of forums that probably will do that. I know it's prevalent in like the web dev industry and Black Hat world and those type of things, where they have forums that talk about how to debunk information, how to tell if something's fake. So again, it's a lot of onus on the user to say, I mean, I was surprised when I saw that whole deepfake thing, and I was like, that's amazing technology. I'm sure it's like the video equivalent of what Photoshop was. But what's being photoshopped now, so we now have to realize that, okay, let me just check the resources and see if there's any other publications and things that have been done with that. So
I like the tip of multiple platforms, of just not just relying on one Google search, but looking, even using social media to find more information or other search engines. To close up, or I want to make some space for #hijacking really quick to end the webinar. I know it's a big topic, but I think it's important to give it a little bit of space. For example, #SaveTheChildren, that started as a unifying chant against child trafficking, but it's now being used to introduce people to QAnon conspiracy theory. It's no longer about child protection for the organizers of these events, but it's a conspiracy theory, hijacking other terms to attract more people into the cause. We're talking now about that extreme silo that we mentioned in the beginning of the webinar. What can the public in general do to, I guess, resurface real sources, or in this case, I think we might not have a clear tip here, but do we have any sort of advice for the watcher at home?
Just get rid of your social media. Just get off of it altogether.
That would be bad for you, Shyla.
I know. I'm not doing myself any favors now. But honestly, though, I think it would. I'm kind of like swerving this, but really diversifying your information. I for sure would not be using social media as my #1 source of information, and really take most everything on social media with a grain of salt, or just realize that information that you do get on social media, you're just going to have to do your due diligence. I mean, and that's, I think, just kind of the territory that we're in now. And if you don't have the time or the energy or the want to do that, I would look elsewhere. I'm not sure that getting all of your information from social media, if that's the case, I mean, certainly shouldn't be the case, but maybe just taking a break. I don't know, maybe that's a radical idea, but.
And I will say that, like, news is very competitive. If there was something that was like so outside of the pale, like there was a child pornography ring in the bottom of a pizza place, there would not be like just a select group of media reporting on that. That would be huge. And so it's like, with the dolphins in Venice, that sucked me in. I was like, really? That sounds great. And then like I did one more search, and I was like, and the first search that came up was the false claims about the dolphins in Venice. I mean, news agencies are now reporting on these fake things that are popping up. So they're easier to verify. But if there is a big story, there is not, the New York Times is not going to not cover it. Washington Post, the Atlanta, the AP, Associated Press, top news agencies are not going to sleep on that story. So, these conspiracy things, you can, just a little bit of research can really debunk them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also like research the hashtag, kind of to your point, Deborah, is like, you can, the hashtag may be prevalent in Instagram or in Facebook, or, but maybe just Google that hashtag and see if there's any people that said, this hashtag is being hijacked. So then you can see articles that are kind of confirming whether or not that this is supposed to be about this, or that there's a big movement. And it happened in favor of certain things, or I don't know if it's good or bad, but like certain rallies, we'll just say, have gotten hashtag hijacked, and then they were like low attendance, and then it was the power of people just kind of doing their way they're protesting. But that being said, it could slip into dangerous ground. So basically, do your due diligence, as stated. Just kind of take the thing and put it in another format and see what comes up. Maybe don't look for all the truth on Instagram, because you're not going to get it there. Don't look at TikTok truth. You got to go and find your truth, because all that stuff is a bunch of people just and saying their opinions and dancing and and showing the best part of their lives or their strong opinions about everything. So you got to take that and put it in a different format and see what's happening.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's a good way to close this. I love the TikTok truth. So, okay, I'm going to send it back to you. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone watching from home.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for this webinar tonight. I learned so much from Arturo and Deb and Alan and Shyla. It is easy for us to think disinformation in social media is swarming all around us and we just have to delete all our accounts, right? But no, you can fight back. When you see something that causes you to pause, then Google it, verify. If you've spotted that disinformation, then report it. You can leave a kind comment to your aunt who unwittingly posted an outdated story out of context. Or you could tell that girl from your high school tennis team that the story that she posted was reported elsewhere as being false. Show grace, but be firm. We shouldn't just be good at spotting disinformation. We need to be dedicated to stopping disinformation. So when you see something, say something, and then do something. If you missed part of the webinar tonight, or you just want to watch it again, then we're going to send out the video playback link tomorrow. Our next Disinfecting Disinformation webinar, it's going to be our last one, is on October 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And so the registration link for that one is in the chat box right now if you want to go ahead and sign up. We are going to hear at that particular webinar from San Diego Union Tribune reporters, and they're going to tell us those dirty tricks of disinformation that they've seen, and they're going to share case studies that you will not even believe. I really can't wait for this webinar. It's going to be a very strong end to a fantastic series. I hope that you'll join us for that. So in leaving, I ask that you please tell us what you thought about the webinar today. This is a school based in continual improvement. So when you get a survey about this webinar, please fill it out. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful evening.